That idea of the caravan of solidarity is a powerful idea. But these things don't happen unless somebody organizes them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, there is a lack of organization. You know, when you propose that, it touches one. But what does one do in a society where there is so much disorganization? You know, on the good side of history. People are organized on the bad side of history. What does one do? People are so atomized, working so hard, feel incapable of doing basic things like keeping up with the news. How are they supposed to form a caravan of solidarity?
I was inspired by this caravan that I mentioned, this TPS bus tour that was called the Caravan of Journey to Justice. They're going around the United States. It's 50 people in a bus. And last week they came to Little Haiti. They were received by local organizations. And they were grandmothers, they were young men, they were just that, some of them lost their jobs. And in part, what they're doing could be merely symbolic in the sense, but we were there with them. We listened to their stories, and other people shared their stories who were also in the same situation. So I don't think it has to be massive. I think that to me was very inspiring, because these are people who could say, sometimes when there are demonstrations here for TPS and other things, you're sitting next to people who are saying, where are the recipients? And people are afraid to show up because they're taking a great risk. And I thought here is that, it was like this small group of people, 50 people, who had made this choice. And so I don't think it has to be, it's not always, huge, but that actually, I wanted to talk about that, aside from listening to about caravans on the news every day the past couple of weeks or so, but also I want to talk about it because of them, because I had encountered them,
But even size, there was 1 million people in the United States who demonstrated to stop the war against Iraq.
Iraq, yeah.
1 million people. And the government didn't pay them any attention. I mean, what kind of democracy is this?
You tell me, you're the historian.
No. I'm confounded by the United States of undemocracy. I mean, Trump wins less votes and he behaves like he's the king.
Yeah. That's how they wrote it, right? Electoral college and the whole thing.
But then the United States goes overseas and tells people to be democracies.
Including, my people, certainly, yes. And they impose the democracy, right? Like, you get who we pick for you.
It's a bizarre, we live in an upside-down world. Mm-hmm. Years ago, I had the very great honor of talking to Eduardo Galeano. Mm-hmm. And Galeano has, this beautiful line where he talks about how people, he says, scientists say that people are made of atoms. By the way, this comes back to how you ended. He says, scientists say that people are made of atoms, but actually people are made of stories. Mm-hmm. Mm. In that sense, storytelling at least recovers hope. I thought that was what you were saying toward the end. It incubates hope. But the world doesn't change with stories alone.
I know. You and I are like the worst match for optimism, right? Because you're going to say these things and I'm going to go like...
The question is, where are we?
But I want to go a bit to your talk about monsters, right? And then sort of like this growing list of current monsters in our time. And I was curious because a couple of years ago when I was writing a book called The Dew Breaker about the dictatorship in Haiti and about this man who was a torturer, but felt like if he wasn't a torturer, he was going to be tortured. So now it seems like we're in an age where people feel like they can display more their monstrosity. How do you see the extension of this element of monsters into the general populace? I mean, we've seen manifestations of it certainly in the last week, but is that something, as a historian of this kind of personalities, kind of people, where do you see that as? Where do you see that going in terms of the general population?
I mean, basically, Edwidge, one thing is there, which is that we need to come to terms with the fact that democracy has an easier time with hate than love. You know, we can say love conquers all and love is important, and I know a number of people displayed that as an idea. But I think the democratic process is not really well disposed to love. You know, take the case of how, I mean, what are elections about now? Today Trump did something quite vicious actually. A reporter asked him this afternoon on the White House lawn, I think, don't you feel like your rhetoric is creating violence? This is a journalist. He turned to the journalist and said, no, you create violence because you are fake news. Now, you know, I mean, I understand that this thing of fake news is real. It's a real issue. In the election in Brazil, for instance, Bolsonaro, the candidate of the far right, had these private groups create WhatsApp groups which were sending out messages saying things like, the Workers' Party is indoctrinating your children to become homosexuals. You know, yes, it's true, last year 175 Brazilians were killed per day. Violence is incredibly, you know, it's troubling. But they use this communication to tell people, be very scared. Vote for me because I'll protect you. You know, Trump said if they had a gun, the synagogue shooting wouldn't have happened. Give us guns so we can protect. Fear plays a much more powerful role. And they are undaunted. Bolsonaro said, between now Brazil and democratic Brazil, we have to kill 30,000 people.
Wow. Like the monster in Duterte, right? Yeah.
But he put a number down.
Wow.
I mean, who is keeping count like there's an actuarian of violence?
Well, which goes back to the days of the dictatorship there, of which he was a part. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is the world we live in. You know, we live in this world where hate is able to, fear in a way assuages anxiety. It's a peculiar thing that if you feel like there is this killing happening, I mean, how many rich people get killed? Very few. How many middle class people get killed? Very few. The killing is happening of the poor, but you fantasize that you are being attacked. And your kind of fascistic sense, like I need 50 guns in my house. By the way, the shootings in Chicago aren't happening of the middle class. They're the poor getting killed. And yet it's the middle class that's almost rabidly pro-security. Why are you so worried? Like, fear has done a number on psychology in that sense.
And why do you think love is so behind? And James Baldwin, when he talks about love, you know, says he's not talking about this infantile sort of love, like the pursuit of happiness love, but sort of this manifested love that you can find in somebody loving a country enough to critique it, or loving and this like love that demands action. Why is that? Is that because it's a quieter emotion? Is that because fewer people feel it? I don't know.
Wow. I hope not. I mean, you have experienced love and you have experienced anger. And love takes much longer to germinate. I mean, it is a much more time-consuming emotion. anger and fear and hatred, these are very quick emotions. I mean, love requires cultivation and, people just don't have the time. And this is what
Do you guys not have the time? Or what?
this is
Do you
what
have the time?
capitalism has done.
All right.
I mean,
Maybe we can hear from them.
yeah, please,
Yes.
please.
Yes.
I can't see anybody to hear from you, but
Yes, let's hear from you. Everybody's shy now.
pardon?
Love is worth to fight for. Love is worth to believe in. And love to be pursued. In every time and all the time, to all human with a core value and a center of ethics in themselves. We cannot let hate make us believe that we are done with love.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. The biblical line is love your neighbor, but
As
you
you
don't
love
have
yourself.
time to meet your neighbors.
No.
And that's a real problem. Sorry.
You have time to meet your neighbor. I am just an artist. I am not a writer. I am not a philosopher. But I am an engaged human being.
Yeah.
Should be time to meet your neighbor. Should be time to care for somebody that you don't know but may need you. And the people who have power and want to break this society into parts and apart, going to make you believe that you should not. The rich have clubs when they met and loved each other. I disagree completely with that, and I'm sorry. I mean, I was incredibly impressed with your conversation, and I appreciate your lecture. But I think that it's so important not to get confused with that. And I think that our democracy is in great period. But I think, meanwhile, we don't find the other alternative. We should still fight with all our aim from be and live in a society as close as democracy as we could. And with the terrible thing that happened in this country right now, still there are a lot of beacons and a lot of venues that prove that democracy is possible.
Well, I don't disagree with you. I'm trying to say something a little different, I think. I don't want to be misunderstood, which is that I think that our social order is working against our innate instincts. And I think that the social order we have, for instance, in a place like India where we talk about displacement, people are displaced daily. They travel 4 or 5 hours a day to work. You leave early in the morning, you go to work, you may not get work in the fields, then you come back, that's 2 hours to get there, 2 hours to come back. There's just no time left for people to build organizations. And we have seen all kinds of social organizations erode as a consequence of the theft of time by this kind of casualization of labor, precarious jobs, things like that. And that's what I mean about the erosion of democracy's capability of creating organizations. To make an organization, to do a caravan, you need to have time. And absolutely we need to fight to produce time. But who is the we? If people are having a hard time being part of organizations, of going on caravans.
Let me propose a different we, and that goes along with what you were saying. As you were speaking, I was thinking of this notion I did talk about from Haiti of the combite. And in rural society, like where my family came out of, you don't have time because you're working the land and you're doing, but people still, one way of going around that was that notion of today I work your land, tomorrow you work yours. And I understand the passion of this because I think especially for, let's say black women who are descendants of slave or, the thing, like, they took your children away because they underestimated your capacity to love, right? And
Correct.
and I see that, like, sometimes when people go to Haiti, like, that's why I ended up writing Claire of the Sea Light, because I was watching a documentary in which someone had adopted a child from Haiti and then was saying, oh, you know, they're not like us, they don't love their kids the same way, they give them away, and so on. So I think that's why, like, when everything else is taken away, like, that love is sometimes all we have, and we've had to fight to love. You'd have to fight. You know, people are still fighting to love the people they want to love, right? So.
You know, there was a book written a few years ago by an economist. Her name is Nancy Folber. And the book is called The Invisible Heart. And one of the things she argues there is with the withdrawal of state support, you know, for, say, people who are suffering from medical problems, for a withdrawal of state support for the elderly and so on, that it's not the invisible hand that makes society function, but the invisible heart. And what she specifically talks about is how the pressure on women in working class and unemployed communities has increased multiple fold, because the obligation has now come on them to take care of elders, to take care of people who are sick and so on. I mean, when I read that book, it made me think about how it may not be common knowledge, but in the last 15 years in India, 500,000 farmers have committed suicide. Because this idea of, you know, you're right, there used to be an idea, you work my land, I work yours, is kind of communal sensibility. But people are losing their land. I mean, big farms, big agro-businesses are coming in, chemical farming has come in. People are losing their ability to create communities. I mean, that's the real crisis that I wanted to emphasize, is that our societies are being attacked. It's not just that it's hard to get a job or that monsters have come to power, but they have been eroding and destroying the basis of our societies. So we have to turn a very, I think, clear eye to rebuilding the social fabric, which has been so tattered, you know, so eroded. And it comes down to things like, if you take away state support for basic things, which has been happening for now more than 15 years, 20 odd years, you take away state support, and families become now the people held responsible for taking care of things which should be socialized. And this is where time has disappeared for people. And hence you get 500,000 people, unreported really, have committed suicide.
And what about societies that never had state support? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, there are many societies that have had no state support. That is true. Where, for instance, elder care was always somehow communitarian. I think there was a report a few years ago, there was a report a few years ago. You know, you were right, 68, 69 million people are displaced now. This is, I think, what, the 16th largest country in the world is the country of the displaced. You know, out of 193, let's add the 194th country, refugee land. But as I said, so many people are not externally displaced or internally displaced, but displaced every day. You know, previously people might have been able to find work within walking distance, or a bus or something like that. Now people are traveling half the day sometimes to find work. And I mean, in that sense, if you had no state support before, now you have no state support, but you have to be gone. And I did a story.
You're pulled out of your community, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your community
where your
is being
support
eroded.
was, yeah.
And your family suffers. I did a story about these women who leave at 4 in the morning to walk about 6-8 miles to the railhead to catch a train. You know, they wake up at 3, they make food for the family, then they go. Then they get back at about 11 o'clock at night. So they are essentially at home from 11 to 3. or 4. That's 5 hours. They sleep on the train. 5 hours in their home. And these are millions of Indian farmers.
Should we get an audience?
Yeah, I can see a hand, but I can't.
Shadow. Go ahead.
I wanted to talk. I wanted to say something about love, which I think, like during the Obama era, it was people were united by love. Like everybody was like, "What is it you loved?" And in a way, it was projected onto Obama. It's like everything you loved, Obama was going to produce, which in fact he didn't because he's not God. But then I remember being on a train in Albuquerque and this woman coming to me, and I think she was from the Tea Party or something, asking me about, the conversation got into like, what did I hate? What was I passionately hating about? And I got to one point that I realized this woman's collecting, because she kind of, even at one point I kind of tricked her and she was kind of, basically hating something that she had basically loved before or loved something she hated before or something. So I said, this is kind of, they're in a way, they're collecting what people hate, And I think that that's what happened with, Trump, is they went on a platform of hate and Obama was on a platform of love. And I think if we have anything to learn from that, is that we can win again with love. Because I think that, collective love is as strong as collective hate. I don't think, we can, I'm going to be a positive. I'm going to be, hoping that I think if we can all get together with what we love, and it doesn't have to be, something that is created by someone else, but between all of us, what is it we love and how do we want to see our future? And it's us. We are just as powerful as they are. Because it's obviously, it worked. It worked with Obama. So, it's worked, the opposite worked for them. So why can't we come back to that love again and get us back on the right track? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's, I don't want to be a downer on that, but...
Go ahead, be a downer.
Well,
Obama wasn't all love. I'll start for you. I don't think he received all love or gave all love. I think,
it's a complicated period, the Obama years, because, I guess it depends where you're standing. Maybe if you're standing inside the United States, that's a legitimate way to see it. But if you're standing in Pakistan, for instance, it's not easy to see it like that. And I think that's something that might need to be considered. That, I don't want to speak like this because I'm not opposed to the politics of hope. But I also think the clear sense of limitation must be there. Obama is in Miami today. And he's come to support the Democratic candidate for the governorship. He's an incredibly charismatic and wonderful person. But again, seen from outside, complicated. We talked today about climate change. And I know within the United States, there's a big difference between, say, Trump and Obama. But in Copenhagen, during the climate summit, when the countries of the small islands and the countries of the poor were trying to argue about the carbon budget and how much the carbon budget is used by the North and how the South was being squeezed to use less, when in places like India, half the population go hungry every day. Mr. Obama walked into the meeting and said, no, you've got to sign on to our climate agreement, which is the North's agreement. So, it's love for whom?
And a lot of, God bless him, but a lot of deportations too.
Right. Please, yeah.
Basically, we throw love in the air, because that's what I've been hearing, love, 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 right? But I also feel that love is also a taught behavior. And we, as people, as normal people,
we naturally come into this world and we pretty much learn to accept our family, our inner love first, to know what it is. So if I was raised in abuse, of course, I'm going to love abuse. Or if I was raised in oppression, then I'm going to love oppression. And then it just seems that, yes, democracy is probably built in promoting hate, but it's hard to kind of translate that energy if I was taught to love hate. So how do we understand or get to that realm or that frequency of love when it has to be implanted and taught properly? Because I can be taught to say, hey, love is love, but I don't really know what love is because I never got it, I never received it. So therefore, how can I achieve to something or to heal something within my community if that was just a word that had lack of no meaning?
You know, I don't know, yesterday I spent the day with the Dream Defenders.
Oh yeah, you were canvassing.
And canvassing for this election. And one of the things that they were canvassing about, which I think was quite powerful, was against number 4, the question of people with felonies not allowed to vote and so on. But I'm not talking about that just in terms of love. You know, what is so powerful is to be around young people who are dedicated to changing the world.
Yeah.
And who love each other. You know, I stayed with them till dinner time and we ate dinner together. They loved each other's company. They loved going among the poor. For them, the question of the poor is not an abstraction. It's a reality. It's their communities. And it's powerful to see people dedicate their time against the tide of history. But you have to sacrifice a lot to be like them.
And that's love in action,
That's
right?
love in
Like
action.
beyond speech. And they're the same with people who go into the prisons here, who work with people who are incarcerated, who go into this. That's actually, I mean, I think love, you know, if we want to get all biblical, like faith without works is that the thing. I think love without action is a lesser kind of love. I guess if we come to a conclusion about love is that you can't just manifest it, you have to act on it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's in the personal space as well as in the political space. And I think that's a really good illustration of that. Certainly this group of young people, the Dream Defenders, are.
And I really recommend you go to their website and download the Freedom Papers if you haven't read it. It's really an intelligent and important document of how they are visionary. And these are young people motivated by the killing of Michael Brown. Michael Brown? By Zimmerman.
Trayvon Martin.
Trayvon Martin, sorry. Trayvon.
Yes.
How many
Who
names
who
there
is
are?
Who is from here.
Trayvon
he's
Martin.
one of ours.
Motivated by that, they've envisioned a new world.
Yeah.
And I would hope that people who live in Florida join, or at least put their shoulders to their wheel.
And it's a world that I think extends, as you were saying, in terms of talking about a global situation. When we talk about U.S. figures, it is a world that also extends beyond their immediate, state, beyond their borders. Like it's very, and it's also very, it's important to be inclusive when we talk about this kind of love, right? Love beyond just who are our neighbors? Our neighbors many of our neighbors will be in that nation you mentioned, in refugee land, of people we cannot see, but who also need our love in whatever way it's manifested, but as action rather than as words.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing like living the values that you hold.
It's hard as hell, but
It's hard. It's really hard. That's what I really want to underline, that it's easy to enunciate values.
yeah.
It's really, but it's admirable to see people living
To
it.
do it, because I mean, if every day we looked at it, we probably wouldn't be wearing the clothes we're wearing. All these small and large decisions, but yeah, it is a wonder when it's done and it's pure and it's full. But it is a sacrifice for the people who do it, and they suffer, and often their families suffer. But that's that love, that's like James Baldwin talks about, that's like that extra, that manifested love, you know.
I mean, that's a writer I hope people have gone back to read deeply.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, I know I see him on the internet a lot, quotes from James Baldwin, but I hope people are reading more than the
full
quotes.
thing.
You know, I mean, it's a funny business. People are upset by book censorship, but nobody seems to be reading anymore. So I worry about that very much.
Is anybody else?
There's
Go
one more
ahead.
there.
Over
Then we
there.
can- yeah.
Sorry, does it work? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Ah, good, so it's working. I want to comment something about love. When you were saying that you need time for love, probably we need time for a certain kind of love. But in general, I don't agree, because I think the very nature of human beings is love. And I will give just two simple examples to illustrate my idea. If we exchange smiles, it makes us happy, any human being. But if we exchange aggressive expressions, it will make us unhappy, any human being. If we help each other, the person who gets the most of pleasure and happiness is the person who is helping, more than the person who is being helped. But if we, for example, do revenge and aggress each other, what happens is that we don't feel happy in that moment, the person who is being aggressive. At the opposite, he or she will feel, I need to take more revenge, to nourish more my ego. And the more you nourish your ego, the less you are happy. And I think this is a very basic feeling that any one of us will feel and will agree about.
Wow.
So love is the very nature of a human being, and we don't have to do any effort. And any child is born in love. And this feeling of need to be cuddled and loved of a child is something that is not taught, it's just there.
See, I feel like the next time I go to I'm really awkward at parties. The next time I go to a party, I'm just going to talk about love. Because this whole conversation, I mean, it just shows how much people want to talk about love.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, I mean, it's kind of amazingly wonderful.
It's a
thing,
foundational
yes.
feeling. I mean, what can you
Yes.
say?
Yeah.
Measure of love. In a place where we are here to come together to understand social action.
Sorry, I can't
So
hear you.
this comment about love, and I understand that it is a very important emotion, but to focus on love as some solipsistic action without action, the sense that it is about your self-satisfaction, is deeply troubling. If we are to contend with the problems which aren't just about our individual pain, but about social needs and about social collaboration, then what does it mean for marginalized people whose very, very presence is questioned, as if the not loving us is something that just happens to us? So this notion that love is just self-satisfactory is not sufficient, I think. It's deeply problematic. So this question of either agency or social collaboration is being left out of this conversation of love, as if love is just about our own feelings. If it's this amorphous abstraction did not actually have consequences on bodies, on lives. And it's becoming increasingly troubling to consider love as if it's just a Hallmark card. It requires a consideration of the other. Love as an emotion is a social act. And this pressurization of saying that love is just about your self-satisfaction seems to be about whether or not we're happy and not about whether or not there are costs to acting. So that's, I mean, just to address that problematic that
Well
we're all
said.
skipping over.
Well
Well,
said.
and I think we were
Yeah.
trying to say that.
Yeah.
With
Can
what
I
you're saying.
just recite one line from my favorite poet, which really underlines, very well said. There's a poet from the 18th century in northern India, Akbar Allahabadi, who gave a line which I think for me is like a talisman. And it is, Aadmi tha badi mushkil se insaan hua. which is that we are people with great difficulty we become human. And it's that difficulty that I want to underline, that it's easy to articulate emotion. It's very hard to enact it. And I think we need to remember that and really recognize and celebrate people who work hard to make us human. Because it's not, we are not born human, we are born people.
And yeah, and I think along the lines of what you were saying, going back to what we previously said, we are also people who it was believed were incapable of love, right? Exactly. And I think that's why, you know, like, we love hard, we love, you know, it's a subject like death, which I'm also very fascinated with, that we will never fully unravel. But I think in the social justice space, it's, yeah, we have to go back to loving ourselves, certainly, because sometimes in loving ourselves, we're like holding up 20 other people. So that has to be part of it as well. Loving community, beloved community, but I don't think it's all, you know, mutually exclusive.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.